Thank you for joining us today. This webinar series has been convened by AGU-H3S, the Hydrology Section Student Subcommittee. This is a 5-part series happening every week at this time this summer, and we look forward to having you join us. Previous Navigating Academic Water webinar series hosted by AGU-H3S are available on the CUAHSI YouTube channel. We are very glad to continue to collaborate with AGU-H3S on series like this one, and are thankful for their hard work in putting together these series for the water science community. My name is Allison Rickard, and I am the Community Outreach Intern for CUAHSI. CUAHSI is a consortium of universities for the advancement of hydrologic science. And our mission is to advance water science by strengthening interdisciplinary collaboration, providing critical infrastructure through our data services, and promoting education in water sciences at all levels through programs like Cyberseminar series. I would encourage you to reach out to me, visit our website, and sign up for our newsletter and join the community Slack channel to learn more about what we do or how to get involved. CUAHSI is celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. Thank you to those who joined us earlier this week at the biennial colloquium. If you missed out, don't worry, you can view recordings of many of the sessions on the CUAHSI YouTube channel. I'll add this information and those things in the chat in a moment. And before we get started, a few logistical things. First, the webinar series is being recorded and will be posted on the YouTube channel later this afternoon. Second, later on in this session, we will be breaking out into breakout rooms, and the breakout rooms will not be recorded. The breakout rooms will start 1 hour from now, and the link to reach the breakout rooms will be posted in the chat at the conclusion of this section. The link to the meeting can also be found in your email that you received with the connection information for this webinar. So you can go back and refer to that confirmation email if you plan to join us there in an hour. Finally, please use the Q&A functionality to submit your questions to our panelists. Thank you for joining us, and to AGU-H3S for putting another fantastic seminar series together. Without further ado, I will pass things off to AGU-H3S member Tom Glose and to introduce this session and panelists.
Thanks, Allison. Welcome back, everybody, to week 4 of our Cyberseminar series. Today, we're going to be talking about startup packages and negotiations. Julia, next slide. So just a quick breakdown of today's schedule. We're going to have some opening remarks, introductions, followed by Q&A with the panelists. So if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A comment box. We'll take a quick break around 1 to transition to the new meeting link. Look for that in the chat or get back to your email like Allison said. And we'll have a first breakout room for the first 25 minutes, and then the second breakout rooms, we kind of mix things up and you can talk to different panelists. And then we'll have the concluding remarks and talk about what's going to happen next week. So today, I'm going to have today's panelists introduce themselves. We're going to start with Sarah Ledford.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Ledford. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am an assistant professor at Georgia State University, just finished up my 3rd year here on the tenure track. My route has been relatively direct towards this path, all things considered. I did my undergrad at a primarily undergrad institution. Took some time off because I thought I wanted to work for the government. It was a recession, I couldn't get a job. So then I went to do my PhD. After my PhD, I did a postdoc for about 2.5 years, and then I've been here since then. The school I'm at is, my department is a master's only institution. And so that's one of the things we can certainly talk about as we go is, what's available to your department may depend on the type of students that you are going to be working with. So we are geography and geology, and I primarily work with both undergrads and master's students. But I am an urban hydrologist. I look at how water moves, how that changes water chemistry, and I've recently been doing more work looking at E. coli. So yeah, I will be happy to answer and talk about lab things for startup.
Soni.
Hi, everyone. My name is Soni Pradhanang. I am an associate professor at the Department of Geosciences at the University of Rhode Island. I'm a hydrologist and water quality scientist. I primarily work using models. So I can call myself a modeler too, primarily modeler, I would say. I do a lot of experiment-based and field-based work too. So a little bit of my background, I come from Nepal originally. I've been here for almost 20 years. I did my undergraduate back in Nepal, and I also did my master's degree in India. Taught 2 years on undergrad school as a teacher, and then I came to US to get my second master's degree at Yale, and then I went to do my PhD, of course, in Syracuse. I did my postdoc looking into source water protection, focusing for 10 million population, and you can guess who that 10 million population would be. It's for New York City. So I was a postdoc for almost 4 years. I was living in Kingston, New York then, and then I moved to Kingston, Rhode Island, in University of Rhode Island. Started as an assistant professor. I received a tenure and promotion in 2019. I received an early tenure and early promotion. And I'm happy to be here to discuss the startup package, what it takes to negotiate being a modeler as opposed to being a field versus lab person. So, and when you connect all the three, things differ a little bit.
Thanks, Soni. Audrey?
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. I am a hydrogeologist. I work in an earth sciences department at Ohio State University. I'm an associate professor there. And I would say probably a pretty traditional academic path did my undergrad in geology and environmental engineering at Rice University, got a master's, decided I actually liked doing research and went on for a PhD. And from there I got really hooked and I was like, yeah, I guess I want to be a professor and do this for my career. I started looking for academic jobs at the end of my PhD and was actually fortunate to land an offer. So part of my negotiation was requesting a 1.5 year delayed start to do a short postdoc and kind of beef up some extra skills I wanted to acquire before I started. And I worked at University of Kentucky in a tenure track job there for a 1.5 years. And then I went to a tenure track job at Ohio State University, where I am now. At both places, I was doing the dual body thing. I was the sort of what you might call leading hire at University of Kentucky, and I was the spousal hire trailing at Ohio State University. So I can speak to negotiating with a two-body situation from both the leading and trailing spouse situation.
Nice. Tianfang?
Hi everybody, my name is Tianfang Xu. I'm assistant professor at Arizona State University in School of Sustainable Engineering and the Built Environment. That's just a fancy name for civil engineering. This is the end of my second year here. And before joining ASU, I have a PhD degree and master's degree, both in civil engineering, and graduated in 2016. And then I went to, I did a 1 year postdoc. And then both my husband and myself are on the job market. And and then we went to Utah State University, where I was a non-tenure track position, and my spouse is on tenure track. So I'm the sort of the buy one, get one free deal. And then in 2019, we moved to Arizona State University, where both of us are on tenure track. So I can also add on to the spousal hire thing.
Great. And as Allison said, my name is Tom Glose. I'm a postdoc at the Kansas Geological Survey. Currently, trying to navigate this academic job market myself. So this has been really helpful for me. So let's get started. After the job interview process, when you get a job offer, the startup package and negotiations is a process that a lot of us don't really understand, and it differs between universities and institutions depending where you are. So just to get started, in general, what are the different parts of the negotiation process, and what things can you ask for, and what things you can ask for, and are there any hidden things that you can ask that you should be looking for and should be asking? Let's start with Audrey.
I would say you can ask for anything, but it may not be given. But I think the more people you talk to, the more you can learn the types of things you ask for. And that's part of the beauty of having a panel like this. So thank you all for organizing. I asked for more time before starting because I really wanted to do a postdoc with Holly Michael at Delaware. I asked for a tenure track job for my very well qualified spouse. And then he asked for a job for me later on. I definitely asked for renovated lab space. I asked for student support, which I felt was one of the most important things. And of course, money for equipment because I work on both computer modeling and field work.
Great. Anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, I would.
So I can.
Oh.
Go. All right. So I being an international graduate, this is something that most of the international graduates forget or kind of like I'm a little bit shy to ask. I mean, when I joined a URI, I didn't have to worry about sponsoring visa or anything. I was already a permanent resident here. So it didn't, I didn't really have to negotiate that part. But when I, like my other subsequent hires in my department, we did have some international hires. And this is something that I ended up reminding the hire that, hey, you gotta think about all of these. So especially for international hires, it's important to ask whether or not there will be visa sponsoring in the first place. And if so, lawyers' fees do cost a lot. So what kind of financial help will be given, to bear all that cost? So that can be a part of startup package too. And I agree with Audrey, asking for extra time is always good. When I took a job, a day of my second baby's delivery, and the start date was the same day. So fortunately, baby came a little early. I packed my bag 2 weeks. I came here, but I received this 1 semester of sort of like break, like a zero load, sort of like just work on building research facility and just show up a little bit here and there, make your office look nice, work on feng shui kind of thing. So it's important to ask for the time, and then rest would be again negotiating the student, of course, lab space, whether you're getting a renovated space, whether you will be spending time renovating yourself. If you're doing that, then you have to include that part of a big fund into the startup package too. And then of course, like students and staff and personnel, all those come as a package. So I'll be discussing that more as we come.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say a couple things. I want to second the student support piece of it. You're probably not coming in with any research grants. And so you want to be thinking through, what do I need to do to A, get my first research grant, and B, make it to tenure? I mean, I think those are your 2 key questions. And so that is, what salary do I need to be able to afford to live and send my kids to daycare? That is, what students do I need and at what price point to recruit strong students? And then it's sort of materials. I'd also note, like Audrey said, you can ask for anything, but it's also probably good to start to get hints about what you can't ask for. Or it's just not, that's not possible. They needed me to come teach classes. I could not negotiate a later start date. That wasn't just going to happen based on the type of institution that I was working at. And then, the one that I always hear people talk about, which I luckily didn't have to do, office furniture. Sometimes you have to add in your negotiation for office furniture and things that you wouldn't think about. So the other thing that I'll note that I tried to negotiate and we sort of found a workaround was, I was moving from Philadelphia to Atlanta. I wanted a trip to come here and see the city and figure out where I wanted to live and look at places to rent. And they actually couldn't pay for that in that direct way, but they were able to find some ways for me to come down for a meeting on campus that, I went to a meeting and then I was able to look around. The last thing I'll bring up is moving expenses. That was another one where they really were not able to help me very much moving, especially if you're going cross country, you're talking $8,000 to $10,000. I mean, it really is expensive. So I'll put in moving costs.
Tianfang, you have anything to add? Or
I do not have much to add, but I guess I think the most important thing is to identify what's your biggest ask. And in my case, spousal hire is my top priority, so I limited what I'm asking in other aspects. And I think situations vary by institution, and sometimes a certain institution may have just a standard package sort of thing, and you really don't. If you only need to justify if you go beyond that standard, but some institutions would not, and I would suggest never make assumptions. And I would say it's okay to ask if there is some flexibility in terms of which item, because institutions does vary a lot. But again, identify the top priority.
great, this is a great start to this. I've often been told from people that I've talked to that are on this job market that you can really only negotiate for one of three things: your lab, more money for yourself, or a spousal hire. Have you guys found this to be the case, or did you find it was possible to get some concessions in more than one category?
Well, I cannot speak for spousal hire because I'm not a spousal hire, but I think you can ask for many. It doesn't have to be just one. I mean, when I negotiated, I requested for, I had the base salary that was in my letter. And then I did ask for, hey, can we negotiate on salary? Let's, increase by this much. So I didn't just come up with a number. I did go through the, if you're in public universities, salaries are posted online, you can actually look at what, and you also have to be aware that, you should know what the salary structure for each department is. Sometimes it differs from department to department, not even just within the college also it differs. So you don't want to cross that boundary also. So it's okay to ask, peers and what type of salary structure would be, and then, negotiate on your salary, because you should know, that's going to be a long-term income, right? I mean, your startup is going to be for at the most 3 or 4 years, but then your salary is where you'll be, when you get promotion, when you get yearly increases on your salary. So it is totally okay to ask salary along with the startup package for a lab or your work, however you want to set it up. And I did it, so.
Yeah, I want to echo push on salary. I'm in a state where we haven't been getting even cost of living increase raises since I've been here. Salary, until you go out and potentially find another offer later on and have them have to counter offer you, is really hard. I'm also a public employee. My salary is listed as were all the recent hires in my department. I could see how much people at other Georgia institutions were being paid. I negotiated up from their starting point at least 10%. And I still felt like it was low, and I've since been able to negotiate that up again. And for me, they had been hoping actually to hire at this position at the associate level. So they had a little bit of a bigger budget for the lab materials than they would have had for the assistant. And I think the key thing you have to do is you have to be able to justify everything you're asking for. I deserve X because I can go see that so-and-so who does the same thing as me is getting paid X. I deserve a spousal hire because I can't come here unless my spouse, comes here. I deserve these lab materials because they're going to do that. So I think I don't think it's true that you may not be able to get all three. I mean, all three might be hard, but you certainly can get 2 of the 3.
Great. So we've been actually getting a lot of questions about spousal hires. One of them being, when is the right time to bring up the fact that you are married and you have someone that's going to be coming with you? Yeah, so Audrey, do you want to answer that one? Since you've been both trailing spouse and the first spot, the front hire.
Yeah, so the way we played this is if there were 2 clear job postings that we fit, or even one clear posting that we both fit, we would both apply. And at that point, it was obvious there's 2 people on the table. But otherwise, we waited until the interview for the most part. I will say that when I got the phone call from Kentucky saying, hey, we want to interview you, it was at the end of a stream of many interviews. And I was not sure if I, wanted to waste their time if they weren't going to have a spousal hire opening at that point. And so I said, that was the first time I kind of changed my tactic and said on the phone, I'd like to come interview, but I have a spouse. And they said, there's probably nothing we can do about it. And I remember at the time I called my dad, who's not in academia, knows nothing about the academic world. And I said, should I go on this interview knowing it's probably a closed door? And he said, Audrey, at your age, I would never turn down the chance for an interview. And I'm so glad I did, because I got off the plane and literally the chair, or the search committee chair who picked me up, was like, by the way, I was at a party with the dean the other day, and he said we might be able to swing a spousal hire. And if I hadn't gone on that interview, my husband and I would have never gotten our first jobs. So I guess what I'm getting at is, no matter when you decide to strategize and reveal those cards, don't count yourself out of the running if you're getting negative news before that, because you never know what will happen. And I would also say, spousal hires, everyone says it's super hard, and it really is. But at the same time, it can actually be a bonus for the department trying to hire you, because maybe they're hungry, they haven't had a lot of hires approved by their dean recently, and they might actually view it as a good thing. So don't assume it's a weakness in your negotiations necessarily. Like, hey, you're smart, you're getting this interview. The person that you've decided to partner with for life is probably pretty smart too. And go knowing that you both have something to offer on the table, and I would say don't change what you plan to ask for just because there's another talented scientist in the mix that the university might be able to benefit from hiring.
Great. Tianfang, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I brought the two-body problem at the time of on-site interview because sometimes they might ask, like, are you married, and ask about your spouse. And I think you should just be honest about that. And I would say the earlier they are aware of this issue, maybe if they're willing to do, like Audrey said, they would be able to do some something early on. Like if they know that another department is doing a hire as well, then they can work together to make that possible.
Okay, just one more question on spousal hires. So one of the questions was, if your spouse is from a different field and they're going to be in a different department, how do you navigate that?
So I don't have experience with that. We were actually in the same department, and in some ways I thought it would make it harder, but in some ways it was easier because the department was like, oh, we might get 2 hires out of this. Tianfang, do you have experience with cross-department?
Yeah, that's interesting because we are also in the same school. But we did we got an offer. We tried to negotiate across department, and unfortunately it did not work out.
Our department has tried to do this recently, so I can sort of speak to it briefly from the department side. That's where it's up to the chair. I mean, the chair has to go talk to the chair of that other department. They have to start initiating those conversations. We're trying to hire someone in our department in, I think, sociology or something. And we were close, but they actually ended up taking a different offer. The couple got an offer that they wanted to go elsewhere. So, I mean, it's just, if it is a good department, the chair of the department is your resource. They are your talking point. They are the one that is going higher up, finding the money, finding all of this. You just need to make sure you're telling them what you need. Yeah, I don't know if I can speak to the difficulty of it or not, but if the department really wants you and knows that this is what they need to get you, they're going to do what they can to try and get it to work.
I'll just also follow up on what Sarah said and mention that the chair, I used to think they represented more the university when I was first starting this, but they actually kind of represent you. They're advocating for you because you're going to be their future colleague who they want to succeed. And so they're actually going up to the dean and asking for things on your behalf. And yes, they have to speak for whatever the dean says, but I've found that all the chairs I've negotiated with really were working in some ways more for me than they were for the university, which is great. Maybe not all chairs are like that. But I would also say Tianfang's experience was interesting because it sounds like they tried 2 different departments and it didn't work out and they ended up in the same. My husband and I actually were trying for the same department at one school that I haven't mentioned that we didn't end up at. And they were really having trouble with making that possible within the same department. And so they actually said, well, what if we write up an offer where we put you, Audrey, in engineering? And we were exploring that idea, but it didn't all play out in the end. So they will try to do anything they can to make sure you guys have a reasonable home that makes sense academically and that you're, you know, that they have a chance to compete for you.
Great. So moving on to thinking about like the negotiation process in general, how long does it usually take? And is there a risk that that potentially your offer could be rescinded? I'll start with Soni.
So how long does it take? Well, let's see how long it took for me. So I got an offer letter in March, sometime in March. And by end of April or mid-April, I had already accepted the offer. So for me, it took about a month. And, you know, you don't want to take it too long either, you know, like, because they are waiting to fulfill the, you know, like that job. And then there are other people in the wait list who are also waiting to hear. So it's not fair to drag it long. But as soon as I got an offer letter and I, like I had a talk, like a phone conversation with Dean, my Dean actually told like, okay, let's discuss money here, and how about you put together your startup package and send it to me, and we'll circle it with the department and with the search committee and the dean, college, and the provost also. It's not just college, it goes to the entire university, and I'll get back to you. So I even before he would ask, I actually had already discussed with my friends, who were already in job market and who had successfully received their job with good negotiations. I had already talked with them, and I had made like a spreadsheet for myself, like what are the things that I'm going to be asking for. And so I had like this itemized list, literally like every single thing itemized. And then like cost, how much would it cost? How many do I need, right? And then where will I get it from? Why do I need it? And then there are some instruments, like I did ask, like other departments have it. So do I need it? And if I do need it, why do I need it? How do I justify that? So just because somebody has it doesn't mean you cannot have it. You can justify the need. So I put those in the list, and frankly speaking, I had asked my friends, and my friends were like, even like just put, like if you're going to be in the field frequently, then you might even want to ask for a vehicle in a startup. So that I never thought of. And for me, I'm a modeler, and I do collect data in the field, but not to the extent that I will go and ask for the vehicles. I didn't put for vehicle, but then I did create a generous, spreadsheet of, a good amount there. And I sent it out to the dean's office. And so there was like an alarm, fire alarm everywhere. And then I had like a funny, conversation with the department chair at the time, and my department chair was a little bit worried that I was on the upper end, and he's like, he sent me email like, can we discuss? And he's like, maybe there are things that we can, like other labs have, so that you can just get it. You might not need these. Maybe you want to reduce it by a little bit. And so there was a good discussion there. And then I also had a very good conversation with Associate Dean of Research, and she was like, all right, let's talk about money. And so, like using catchwords, like why is this money needed for you? Like, what do you see yourself in 3 years? What do you see yourself in 5 years? That's extremely important. And also look at like how others are doing, as Sarah said, like how others are doing in the area. And, like if there are none doing the kind of work that you're doing, you really are in a good shape. I also, suggest people to use like a catchwords, like, oh, this is going to be a cutting edge lab, like those adjectives, like just highlight those. This is going to be, how will it be different from others? So put those in writing, discuss this with over the phone. If you're doing that over the phone, put everything in writing. And so that's what I did first. And just because the chair thought like I was a little bit above. I reduced it a little bit, and then I was just about to send email to the dean's office like, I am sending you a revised startup. And even before I sent, I'm glad I didn't send it. I got an email from the dean's office saying, wait, we are working on your startup. All right. So surprisingly, I got more than what I asked for, which which was a sweet surprise for me. And my department chair and search committee were very, very happy with the fact that I was getting more than what I got, what I asked for. So the whole process did take about a month for me. What you want to know is like, you don't want to do too much back and forth negotiating, because you don't want to really irk them also. But things like renovation, whether I'm spending on renovation or whether I'm spending on renovation, where does that money come from? Little things need to go in there that you never know when you need money during your 5 years tenure or more than that.
Yeah, so real quickly, I think you should be thinking about 3 to 4 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, especially if they're dealing with things like spousal hires. But following up, you should, if you are interviewing, start working on your startup list. I mean, there's no reason to not start it now. If you are interviewing and they ask you how much you think you need, I suggest punting a little bit on that. I find schools that ask that are trying to get a sense of if they want to offer it to you, or are they not going to offer it to you because you're going to ask too much. I got a job offer from a place that I wasn't super thrilled with. I thought the salary was way too low, and they basically said, we can give you $5,000 to help buy a logger. And then gave me 5 days to answer and accept the offer. And I said no, and I didn't have another job, and it was the scariest thing I had to do in my life. But I've also felt that them giving me such a short frame of window was a sign that it wasn't a place that I wanted to work with, that they were trying to lock me in because they knew I was marketable. And sure enough, 5 days later, I got another offer, and a week later, I got another offer. But that was the scariest thing I have to do. And so, I guess there is always a risk of them taking it away, but they want you. At that point, they want you. So if you need to say, hey, I need 5 more days because I need to figure out X, ask for 5 days. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that I also want to bring this up was, this was like my, during the interview process at other universities. So I interviewed for like one position where, I interviewed for a very well-known person who left the job. And so this person already has a structured lab, a huge lab. So, and when I was interviewing, I was given a little bit of hint that, this is, you're going to be inheriting this lab, which would mean that the total startup package might be, that will consist of this lab, but the dollar amount will be less because you're getting all these, inheritance. So you have to also think about those. And while you are inheriting labs, you also want to check those labs and see whether or not they're really good. Sometimes you inherited not so good ones, which will require more money than the actual lab itself. So you do want to check all those little details. And, and for me, a lot of people ask me, you're a modeler, what do you need so much money for, right? That's one of the questions that I've heard from people. So I do lab, I do data collection and field, and I model. So which means I need even more, right? But then again, you have to justify why do you need it. And if you're just a modeler, if you're not doing an experiment or going out in the field, then you should always request for the high performance computing facility. You should put that in your request, because that could cost more money, and high performance computers and all those things should be part of the package, which are not cheap. So.
Real quick, we had a good question from the audience here. How do you, so you talked about, shared use equipment, if somebody has a piece of equipment in another lab, things like that. Is there a good way to, can you work with the existing faculty to discuss this before? And how do you kind of justify shared use equipment? Is there a way to increase the amount or the type of instruments and supplies you can ask for? Is this you say, I'm going to share with somebody, therefore I want more on this other thing? Can anybody speak to that?
I can definitely speak to this. I mean, because I did ask like other faculty in the university in the field of water, like what they're doing and what kind of instruments they have, how old they are, what type of maintenance are required for those instruments, and like how long they're going to be using that and how will they make it available for others, right? So there might be one, but they might not be available. So that's extremely important to ask. And as I said, just because somebody has that instrument doesn't mean you cannot have one. You might have your own time schedule of going into field, carrying your instrument, doing your lab experiment. So you will need it no matter what. So if you think that that instrument is absolutely needed for your success, then you got to put that in your startup.
Gotcha. Just in the interest of, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to add real quickly, the other thing you can do is you can do a real quick back of the calculation, envelope calculation. So, okay, if I don't get this instrument, I have to pay X per sample and X per day to send my students to X locations, so flights, hotels, whatever. And it's going to come out to this amount for me to be able to collect this data that I need. And you can start to like, if that is cheaper, okay, maybe just ask for this hunk of money to be able to send samples off and send students off. I think usually people are on the other side of it. They're going to use an instrument a lot, so they want one for themselves. I have never heard of someone negotiating to jointly buy a piece, but I think it could be a very interesting approach because it's negotiating, and that's what you're doing.
Just in the interest of time, I'm just going to move on to the next question. When I started down the academic job route, I had actually never really heard of a startup package, didn't really fully understand what it is. So when you start hearing about submitting like a startup package, what is actually like included? What can you include in a startup? And what are some tips for actually negotiating within your startup? Now, Audrey, you want to start with that one?
Sure. I included, a server for running models and workstations for the number of students I expected to have in the beginning, which I think at the time was 2 plus me, so 3 workstations. I included a lot of field equipment, but I'm a physical hydrogeologist. So all of that at the end of the day, I mean, I guess it depends what size or scale department you end up in as to what is considered big, but all of those things at the end of the day weren't too incredibly expensive. I would imagine, especially at my first institution, that my space renovations ended up being the biggest ticket item, and that I never saw the true cost of. And students, like the personnel are a big, personnel are always the most expensive thing on any budget, it seems, whether it's a grant or startup, but I did not know the value of those things. So I just put them at the bottom of my running total, which I answered in the Q&A, by the way. I just put it at the bottom of my running total without a cost and said, I need these things, they're very important, but I don't know the cost. So either could you please provide me with that information to update the budget, or just know that these are essential things in my budget that I don't have the value of for your institution.
Yeah, I found out recently that my position currently was part of somebody negotiating their startup. So personnel is important.
Yeah, I want to add to Audrey's list of things to ask. You should also ask for summer salary for a certain number of years, if that is like doable for certain universities don't provide, but certain universities do provide summer salary. So like the beginners, maybe 3 years of 2 months summer salary, that helps a lot, or less, however it works. That's extremely important. And also in the startup, it is important to delineate whether the grad students that you get is a part of the startup package, or is it coming from a separate money? So you want to make it as transparent as possible and as accountable as possible.
And that brings up a really, 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 really important part, which is gets at the thing you missed sort of thing for me. Most schools do not put a time limit on when you have to use your startup package necessarily. My university does. I had a set amount I had to spend in year 1 and a set amount I had to spend in year 2. And that is terrifying, because usually what you do is you slowly buy things and you live off of your startup until you get your grant. And I was going to be coming out of year 2 without money to maintain machines. And I was just really freaking lucky and I got a grant. And so I've been able to keep rolling. But that is one I wish I had pushed on, because it has to do with how the state of Georgia budgets, which is out of the university's control. So I don't think I would have been successful, but that is very different. And so the other thing that I'll add is include one thing in your budget, from a start that you can either cut if they ask you to come back, or you could spend that money on something else sort of if you needed to. So I put in, and Tom will probably understand this, I put in a Sona nitrate logger and decided to buy a discrete analyzer instead, because you don't have to buy exactly what you said. You're saying this is a general set of things that I need to be successful. And so if that's a postdoc, which can be really helpful if you're setting up a chemistry-based lab, a postdoc that can deal with buying orders and chemicals and training students. I mean, all of that could be extremely helpful if you're very field intensive. A postdoc who knows the methods and can go out and oversee the students gives you the time then to be writing the grants. So yeah, I also wish I had a postdoc.
Let's see. Audrey, you kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier. How do you, like, if you don't know what you need, like for how much you have to pay for a grad student, like what do? You just kind of say, I need a grad student, whatever you guys normally pay, let's put that in there and add it up? Or do you kind of put out a ballpark figure?
Yeah, and that's what I did. And some schools were like, well, look, we can guarantee you support in the form of half TA, half RA, and here's how much you should put in for the RA part of this. But you're going to run into trouble if you try to ask for 2 full years of RA for 2 students or something like that. So they'll tell you when it's going to start to get expensive and when you might be going nowhere with your negotiations. All you can do is ask, and if you don't have the value, they will either give it to you or they'll just say, give me your budget as is and we'll figure it out, and it'll end up with the value that will cover those things in your offer letter. And you can always ask for clarification if you're worried that you don't quite have the full picture on values and costs. And like Sarah said, like I had some institutions say, your startup budget actually looks good, but I need you to break it down by year because we need you to be able to bin this by how much you expect to spend each year. And in one case, they said, don't worry, it'll roll over, but we still need you to predict what you'll spend each year. I've had some institutions just say, yep, looks good, I'll take this to the dean. So it just totally depends.
Great.
I used a cost of living calculator when I looked and said, what does it cost to live in Atlanta? I want to pay my grad students that. I did not get that much, but I felt like that was a really easy starting point. The follow-up, which is once again, Audrey, as she mentions, you need to talk to them. Do you have to pay tuition? We're very lucky here. Tuition is just waived for our grad students, but if your startup has to include tuition for grad students, that adds up really fast. So those are ones to work with your chair.
Great. So Tianfang, what is the best way to determine what a university is likely to approve in a startup package and what total amount is reasonable? Because you guys are all from various institutions that vary in size and what the main, like R1, R2, teaching focused, research focused. So how do you figure out what a university is most likely to approve of?
So I got a rough sense by chatting with my PhD classmates that have already gotten an offer. I feel like from my own experience as well, there tends to be a normal standard. Like you get, for example, 2 PhD student support for 2 years and things like that. But again, well, it might vary from teaching focus or research focused universities. I also ask those questions when I interview. I can, for example, during an individual meeting with a faculty member there, you could ask, how many PhD students you have, how many PhD students the department have, and you can sort of figure out the research activeness. And you can even, if you feel confident, you can even ask, what do you think would be a normal range of startup? I think I think it often is fine to ask those questions during interview, but that's just my own sense. I forgot to mention when I introduced myself, I'm a purely modeler. I only do computation, so I guess I don't need any support for lab. So that actually lowered the amount that I need to ask within my startup. But others would have different cases. Does that answer your question? Answer the question?
Yeah. I just want to add anything on. before I move on to the next question?
Email people like myself and Audrey. Think about who is in the position doing similar work at a similar school, which it may not be perfect, and ask them if they're willing to share what they asked for. People are really quiet about this, and that makes it really hard. And I fully understand why you asked that question. And so if you end up in a room with me when this is not being recorded, I'm happy to share the amount that I asked for. But it's an oddly touchy subject. But yeah, just prod those networks. Most people will understand why you're asking and be willing to either give you a ballpark or even a list.
Oh, great.
I'll also just say that just over the course of conversations, most chairs will be really clear about like, I really don't think this is going to be likely, but I'll ask on your behalf. They give you pretty good feedback along the way. So as long as you can just be open and, ask for what you need, but, just try to be respectful about it, ask for everything, and they'll tell you if something's going to be a non-starter.
They're going to not let it go past them if they know it's going nowhere. They will immediately come back, and you will only lose a little bit of face with the chair, and they'll understand why. I don't think you have to be afraid of asking for what you need, and they will come back and say, you need to cut that in half if it's not in the ballpark.
Gotcha.
Actually, so speaking of this on the salary subject, I was told once that something was going to be a non-starter. I looked at average salaries of assistant professors at an institution where I had an offer. And I said, you know what, this offer shows a salary that's a little bit lower than the average for assistant professors. Can I please have the average salary that's listed on the web? And they said, haha, that's an average of everyone in arts and sciences and the College of Medicine. And we will just not be able to do anything on the salary. I'm sorry, I wish we could do more. And they were nice about it, but there was a reason that they couldn't do anything. Other places are great about negotiating salaries. So I still encourage you to ask, but just know if they don't think it's going to be an issue they can get traction on, they'll tell you why, and it'll be clear.
Speaking of salary, that's a good transition point. So I personally, when I'm trying to negotiate, I'm not really good at it. I kind of get nervous, a little timid. So how do you kind of frame, like if you're going into a job, how do you frame that, I want a higher salary, I know what I'm worth, and I know that you guys are kind of shorting me here. How do you go into that situation with like confidence and being ready to go? Soni, you want to tackle that one first?
So first, you definitely want to look at like what salary is being offered and compare with what your peers have been receiving in the area, similar area, right? You don't want to compare, one tier 1 to tier 2 or, tier 2 universities, but at the similar ranking in the same area, reason of course matters, places matter. So you want to compare that first. And as Audrey said, it doesn't hurt looking at the average salary online, but sometimes it can be misleading too. But if it's public universities, we are all listed there. They should have, there should be a way to look at it. And as I said, I added about 15% to the salary that I was offered. And, I must say I was lucky that, they okayed it, but now when I look at it, I think that I should have, asked more, because I should have done a little bit more research. I did ask, friends and peers and, a lot, but I still feel like I should have done a little more research and, a little more wouldn't have hurt. So there's no such set rules to what you should ask and what you shouldn't ask. It's that, you do want to do your research, a little bit of research, and it doesn't hurt asking.
This was the funniest conversation I had with my chair when I was negotiating was, I didn't know, I'm terrible at buying cars for the exact same reason. I'm like, do I have to go over because she's going to come back under? And I'm bumbling on the phone. And finally, and I love her for this, she goes, Sarah, what is the dollar amount we have to pay you for you to come? And she like cut through the crap and was like, what do we need to pay you? And I was like, oh, I know that number. I now, once again, think I should have pushed a little bit higher. But the other thing that I'll bring up, especially if you're in a place where salaries are public, I was a little afraid to push higher than what I was seeing the recent hires have been, because you cause salary inversion at that point. But that's not your problem. It's the fact that those other people are not getting paid enough. And that's the problem that the department and the university needs to fix later. So if you feel that you need to get paid more than someone who was already recently hired, explain that and push for that higher salary. I was a little afraid to cause salary inversion.
And I mean, to add to it, you should also ask like what the annual increase rate is going to be, right? I mean, whether or not you really get it, state universities, that's going to be a laugh, I know. For you. But you should ask. You should definitely ask. Maybe you will get retroactive pay. Who knows?
Yeah, I will also say if you're lucky enough to have two offers at the same time, it helps with your negotiating power. And the same school that laughed at me about, taking an average salary that I had not realized included the medical school, also was like, we'll match your other offer. I was fortunate to have a same offer at the same time. And I think it probably did cause a little bit of salary inversion, and that maybe was why they couldn't go much higher to try to compete with that other school, but they were willing to match. So, and speaking of salary inversions, I mean, I think Sarah was getting at this, the rising tide floats all boats, right? And so they don't want to create salary inversions if they can help it. But if they're able to give you something more competitive, it will eventually help all of their faculty, because then they have a case to give their other faculty a raise. And so if they can get your higher salary approved by the dean, they can say on the next year, like, hey, these people really need a raise too. So most of your future peers want you to ask for as much as you can reasonably ask for too, because the rising tide floats all boats.
Great. Tianfang, I think you're going to add something.
Oh yeah. So I myself did not negotiate for salary, but I heard this from a friend who convinced a higher salary by arguing that this is the amount that he needs to be successful. There are like family factors or different factors. Eventually, the whole startup is there for you to be successful, and if you can convince them that this is indeed what you need, I think they could be fine with the salary raise.
Great. So just in the interest of time, like one final question for all of you. In this entire process, what is the one thing that you wish that you added to your list, or that you wish that you asked for, that now looking back is like, oh, that should have been one of the things that I immediately asked for? Let's start with Soni. Putting you on the spot.
Oh, why? Well, a couple of things that I wish I did it differently. Well, one is, of course, that you want to make sure like when you need to spend a certain amount of time, a certain amount of money. And it's also sometimes important to ask where that part of money is coming from. Like when the startup money is provided, at different state universities that I know, comes from provost office, college, it comes from different pots, and they might have an expiration date. So, like, try to spend it. And again, as Sarah said, that you might have listed instrument A. If you're not going to buy instrument A, that's totally fine. Buy instrument B, and try to mobilize that money sooner than later. You never know when money disappears, and they'll always have a good justification to say where it went. So. Don't be afraid to spend the money that is being given to you to be successful. And, again, you'll be writing grants, you'll have, like you have grants, that's great. And, but I do feel like, using money wisely is important, but also use that money. It's given to you to purchase goods and purchase research instruments and, do experiments and everything. So do that, and don't wait for third year to spend your startup money. I mean, I didn't really do that. I mean, I started spending right away. I had some unfortunate situations where my lab flooded, I had to get, like another set of instruments, which allowed me to extend for a extension for a year to spend my startup. But if that can be negotiated ahead of the time, that's really good.
Great. Audrey?
Gosh, I feel like I got the things I needed to be able to be successful. And I'm not sure what else I would have added, but I've been trying to rack my brain, and maybe on the second move that we made, I might have asked if I could get a spot for my kid in daycare, in the university daycare, because that was, it ended up being a shorter wait than they told me it would be, but it was scary while we were waiting. Like, hey, you know, we might be without daycare for a little while if we really want to get into the convenient university daycare.
I've actually heard that from multiple people, that if you want to negotiate daycare, it's super important. Tianfang?
I was going to say that was super important. I totally agree. That's something I should have asked for. We have been more than 2 years on the wait list, and we're still not there yet. So, but yeah, I guess that's probably the only thing that I wish I asked for. Thanks for bringing that up, Audrey.
All right, Sarah, I've given you enough time to think about it. What would you ask for?
A field vehicle. You know, I do local field work, so I didn't think about it quite that much. But either a field vehicle or a pot of money to reimburse my students who have to use theirs. But I mean, this is now a really awkward question I have to ask potential students is, do you have access to a car? And it's really unfortunate, and I don't like that I have to do it. And with coming with a field vehicle, though, you need a long-term plan for maintenance, just like you do for an instrument. So paying for gas, paying for maintenance, and how all that works. That's, as someone who does a lot of field research, that's the one I want.
Great. So if we didn't get a chance to answer any of your questions, feel free to join us in the breakout rooms that are going to be happening in 5 minutes. We had a ton of questions, so it's kind of hard to get them all through. So we'll see you guys over in the breakout rooms in 5 minutes here. Thanks a ton to the panelists. This was a great conversation. I learned a ton today, so I hope everyone in the audience did as well. So we'll see you guys in the breakout rooms in 5 minutes.